Hey Dreamers, welcome back to the channel. In today's video, I'm going to be covering every single controller shortcut I know of for audio mode. Since it seems like a lot of people don't know about certain ones, I'd like to consolidate them all into one place, so stick around. We're going over them right now. The first thing I want to say about these shortcuts is a lot of times the shortcuts are actually shown to the left or right of your imp. We can see here it's showing us a bunch of things, and it's pretty easy if you've spent some time in Dreams to basically completely ignore everything floating around the imp. And so, for example, the first shortcut I want to show is how instead of doing this, where you can drag the trim end, you can actually set that with your controller. So if we highlight this, we can see it shows right there, trim left, right, or trim left and trim right. So the shortcut is you hold L1, and I'll start time so we can see the little controller thing. You hold L1 and you click L3 to set the beginning or the left trim, and R3 to set the right trim. So you can set this anywhere on here just using L1 and L3 or R3 depending on if you're setting the beginning or the end. The next shortcut has to do with recording, and it doesn't show around the imp, but if you highlight record, you can see it says shortcut L3 plus R3. So if we're in perform mode here, we can just click L3 and R3 and that will start recording. Again, you can click L3 and R3 to stop recording. So that's a nice little shortcut. While we're in this perform mode, one shortcut that doesn't show up is if you hold L1, you can click the touchpad on your controller to switch between perform view and piano roll. Let me see, if you highlight this, it doesn't say. So L1 and touchpad switches between perform, what is this called? Switches between freeform view and piano roll. The next shortcut has to do with drawing notes. So if we're drawing notes on here, you can just draw on them like that. If you hold L1 and use R2, we can freeform draw, which is cool. And something that doesn't show on here is the spice. So you can see here in the freeform view, if we hold L2, it adds spice. But if we draw, it doesn't show that. However, the spice still works. So we can see here is, here I'll just draw a normal note. This is just holding R2. And let me get this out. But if we hold L2 while drawing, it adds spice, and we can see that it's a different color. So the same thing is true with these freehand. You can start drawing without spice, and then add spice, and then remove spice, just by holding or adding L2 into the mix. One other thing I'd like to point out with these drawn notes while we're here, this isn't exactly a shortcut either, but you can actually adjust the length of these by dragging the end. So you can move anywhere else you grab, you're just dragging the whole note, but you can also change the length of it by doing this. The next tip has to do with selecting notes. So we can double click everything within a piano roll to select all the notes, or if you're not in perform mode, you can double click on the notes in the actual freeform view itself. However, there's an easier way sometimes, and that has to do with selecting. So if you hold L1, we can use X to select a range of things, and anything within this box that you end up drawing is selected. Similarly, you can do it over here on the left-hand side with the piano roll. You can do the same thing on the timeline at the top. There's no way to do it on the left-hand side, unfortunately, but this is a much easier way to select things. And this also works for the instruments that are have the row mapping, like a drum set. So if we just add a bunch of stuff, that is the hottest song of 2021. We can see there's a bunch of notes in here. We can select this way, or we can select this way, Or if you just want to select one of these rows, like the triangle row, you just hold L1 and click X, and it selects everything in that row. Same thing within here. If we just hold L1 and click on one of these notes, it'll select every one of that note. Alright, here's another shortcut. There's this speed tempo, which will extend or decrease the actual length of the object, but really what it's doing is changing the speed of it being played. If you hold L1 and use R2, we can do this from outside of the tweak menu. However, it still just affects the speed tempo here. Now, this may not be a shortcut per se, but I would like to point out that I think these are often overlooked, is there is a volume and a spice setting while playing in freeform view here. You can use R2 to lower the volume of the note, and if we record that, we can see how that looks here in the piano roll, how it's affected halfway. Which that's not something you can do if you were to draw the notes. You couldn't do that. Same thing with the spice. If we hold L2, we can add spice to our notes. Another shortcut is if you hold L1, you can change the music snap. We can see here that music snap is set to 1/16th note. If we use up and down on the D-pad while holding L1, we can change this. So this way you don't have to go into the menu and up into settings and change it here. You can just hold L1 and use up and down on the D-pad to change between the different music snap settings. There are a couple shortcuts I think I should show here in the tweak menus. These things may be common to a lot of people, but I think they could use a little bit of explanation. So we see here that the volume has a range. And the way you do that is by holding L1 and moving this with X. We see we've added a range. And we can see here L1 plus X, we can see L1 plus X drag variation slider. So that's how we add variation into different effects. We can hold L1 and drag a range, and that way every time a note is played, it falls somewhere within that range. Now a lot of times you'll see something that looks like this, and that is the spice slider. So this means that when spice is applied, the effects or the sliders or whatever it is moves to that location. So if by default our volume is down here at 50 or 35, and we want when spice is being played it to go up to 78, then you can use that as well. So you hold L2 and you drag the thing to where you want it. This can be applied to a bunch of things you may not think about. For example, like this filter cutoff here, or the resonance thing. If you hold L1, we can also apply a range to this. The little dot is where it ends up landing within that variation. And of course you can still do the same thing with the spice. So this little white box is, if we were to hold spice, that's where that box goes. So that's pretty cool. And now this one may be obvious, but if you have a bunch of changes and you don't like them, triangle is the shortcut to change things back to the default value. So if you just hover over everything and click triangle, that's how you can get things back to the default value. Alright, so those are all the tips. How'd I do? If you have any other tips that I missed, please leave a comment down below and I'll pin it or highlight it, and I'll add them into the description. I'd like to keep a giant list of all of the shortcuts that people know about, because a lot of times I feel like not knowing about them can maybe hold you back or slow you down at least a little bit. If you've made it this far, thanks so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed. I hope you're having a great day or a great night and you're staying safe. I'll see you next time.